Happy Halloween, interwebs! As regular viewers know, the culmination of spooky season brings with it a new installment of Russell's Guide to Monsters, and today I'd like to talk about modern modifications of mythological monsters, mainly minotaurs. Regular viewers also know that I have a soft spot in my heart for them, which I struggle to put into words, let alone justify. Perhaps the fact that this monster's parent mythology is literally older than recorded history lends it a timeless quality which allows it to fit comfortably into any fantasy setting, ranging from low to heroic to epic and beyond. Minotaur variants are equally at home in mytho-historical stories, contemporary cryptid folklore, and sci-fi space operas. That's because they're not immune to reinvention, quite the opposite in fact. Since time immemorial, works of speculative fiction have been creating their own minotaurs, not so much reinventing the wheel as seeing what can be done with it. So let's take a look at the results. First up, we have the Boo Centaur, if you want to call it that. One thing I like to do on this channel is talk about childhood misconceptions of mine, and as a larval fantasy nerd, I knew that a minotaur was a bullman and a centaur was a horseman, so I inferred, incorrectly, that the suffix tar meant man, or something like beastman. Of course, it actually means bull, so the real meaning of Minotaur is Bull of Minos, and the meaning of centaur is, debated. One theory claims it comes from Kentauros, meaning piercing bull, and originally referred to a tribe which hunted wild cattle with spears or lances from horseback, but we'll likely never know for certain. I mention it now because this first Minotaur variant I'd like to discuss combines the two species. The Boo Centaur is essentially a centaur with the body of a bull instead of a horse, and this was how many medieval and Renaissance artists portrayed the Minotaur, because Ovid's Latin translation, which was the most widely available during the Middle Ages, failed to specify which half was a bull and which half was a man. More recent depictions of the Boo Centaur give it a bull's head as well, which I find particularly silly. You've got a fantasy creature with the head of a bull on the body of a bull, but with the trunk of a human jammed awkwardly in between. I think it's also worth mentioning that the name Boo Centaur came first, and the concept of a bovine centaur is folk etymology invented as retroactive justification. The word Boo Centaur began in Italian as Bucentoro, the name of a ceremonial barge used by the Doges of Venice. The origin of this name is unknown, but one possible etymology combines the traditional lagoon vessel called a borsio with oro, meaning covered in gold. The ox centaur derivation, on the other hand, is completely fanciful, as no such creature exists in Greek myth, as the folk etymology typically claims. Now, as we all know, the original Minotaur dwelt in the labyrinth of Minoan Crete. He was the Tor of Minos, and this is why Ferdinand from Wonder Woman dubs himself a Kithotar, because he's from Kythera. We can therefore infer that other locations have their own Tars, so what would the North American variant be? I imagine it would be a semi-humanoid plains bison, for which you can have this 3D printed minifig, or this larger action figure of Bison/Billy Kitson from Marvel Comics. If you're fine with substituting cervids for bovids, you can also have stag and moose minis. I would argue, however, that the Goat Man is the true American Minotaur, at least in spirit. The Goat Man is a cryptid, or rather he's several cryptids. The Goat Man of Prince George's County, Maryland, the Goat Man of Old Alton Bridge, the Lake Worth Monster of Texas, and the Pope Lick Monster of Kentucky are all claimed to be half-man, half-goat-like hybrids which haunt their respective locations, and in what may be a bizarre coincidence, most, if not all, of them are also said to wield axes. Why is this? Perhaps it's because axes aren't hard to find in rural areas, while also being easily repurposed as large, frightening weapons. They're also the go-to weapon of choice for brutal or barbaric characters in fiction due to their raw damage potential and lack of finesse. A big old double-bitted axe and horned helmet just go together like chocolate and peanut butter, and if minotaurs are anything to go by, the helmet is optional. Inspired by Greek myth, minotaurs are most often found in labyrinths, where they're either guardians or prisoners, and these goatmen seem to have a preference for bridges. A bridge isn't a labyrinth, granted, but both are man-made structures. Thus, you've got a humanoid monster with horns, cloven hooves, and a big scary axe who haunts a specific location. It's as true of a goatman as it is of the minotaur. Sure, fauns and satyrs are the actual caprine humanoids of Greco-Roman mythology, but the goatman is a violent monster, whereas fauns are closer to gentle, nature-loving spirits. Dipping into older folklore, and I mean biblically old, we find Moloch. This entity is sometimes depicted as a bull-headed humanoid deity appeased by child sacrifice, and it's hard to say much more than that. It's generally accepted as a Canaanite god whose name means ruler, and artists since the medieval era have depicted it as a bull-headed idol with hands outstretched over an immolating fire. As the Bible gives no physical description of Moloch, it's reasonable to believe that these portrayals took inspiration directly from myths of the Minotaur, as suggested by religious historian and author George Foot Moore. Although Moloch lends its name to many villains in modern fiction, fewer take the bullhead design with it, but some which do can be found in Dungeons & Dragons and Mikame Tensei. Warhammer's Chaos Dwarfs also worship a bull-headed god who must be appeased with regular sacrifices, although his name is Hashut. Moloch is also the name of the monospecific genus of thorny devils. They share their specific name, horridus, with the type species of Triceratops. Given that M. horridus is this spiky little reptile and T. horridus is this big spiky reptile, I'm dying to see Horridus's intermediate Pokemon evolution. Or maybe it's doing the Magikarp thing. Speaking of Triceratops, another Minotaur variation replaces the bull parts with those of a ceratopsian dinosaur. It's also worth noting that there's only a 2-letter difference between Minotaur and dinosaur. Recombining their prefixes and suffixes, we get Minosaur, meaning the lizard of Minos, and Dinotaur, meaning terrible bull. Honestly, the latter wouldn't be an awful name for a horned ceratopsian like Diabloceratops or Einiosaurus, or Triceratops obviously, as they do look a bit like a monstrous reptilian bull. Replacing dinos with rhinos, you get rhinoceriid minotaurs, and I've seen these in both bipedal and quadrupedal forms. Both minosaurs and rhinotaurs are frequently bigger than regular minotaurs too, but what if we went to the other end of the size spectrum? Breeds of miniature cattle can be found in locations all over the world, from America and Europe to Asia, Africa, and Australia. If you combine one of these bulls with a humanoid, perhaps a halfling, would you get a mini-tar? I like to make puns, but Mascarita Dorada is a 4'4" professional wrestler with a bullman gimmick, so much so that his WWE ring name is El Torito, meaning the little bull. Another pun-based Minotaur variation is the Mohitar from the tabletop drinking game Heroes of Barcadia. Now, imagine, if you will, a standard Minotaur. It has the head of a bull on the body of a big, strong man. Modern depictions usually make it taurine from the waist down, whereas classical depictions keep it humanoid, but this variation has the tail of a fish. No, this isn't the hypothetical offspring of a mermaid and a minotaur. There's already a comic about that. It's Rabbi, the Bulgarian lake monster. Also known as the water bull, or Vodenbik, this creature is said to dwell in Rabisha Lake in northwestern Bulgaria, near the scenic Belogradchik rocks and Belogradchik fortress, which also looks like something straight out of a fantasy film. Because Rabisha Lake is endorheic, meaning no waterways flow out of it, local folklore claims it is bottomless, making it an ideal home for all sorts of mysterious creatures. One 18th century legend, which was revived in the early 2000s in an overt attempt to promote tourism by riding on Nessie's proverbial coattails, claimed that the locals would make an annual sacrifice to the water bull of many wonderful gifts and the most beautiful maiden available. One year, the young lady was so beautiful that the water bull fell in love with her. Then, instead of killing her, he asked his sorceress sister to make her immortal, and the pair lived happily ever after at the bottom of the lake, and the water bull never bothered the surface world again. Although generally thought of as a minotaur mermaid, Rabbi could just as easily be a combination of a minotaur and a regular fish, a normal bull and a mermaid, or a human and a taurocampus, all of which we've discussed before. If a minotaur with the back half of a fish is too far-fetched for you, how about a spider instead? This is one of the stranger minotaur variations, as well as one from my childhood. It's Arachnotar, the spider god of anger, from the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy. He's a sort of hybrid between a minotaur and a giant spider, or arguably an arachnid bucentaur or a bovine drider, which itself combines a humanoid, specifically a drow, and a spider. You could also call them arachnocentaurs or arachnians, as I do in my urban fantasy setting. Terminology aside, he has the head of a bull on a humanoid upper body, albeit with hooves in place of hands, and is an arachnid from the waist down. Well, I say arachnid. He's only got 6 legs, 1 pair too few, although if you're willing to include his humanoid arms, they bring the total number of limbs up to 8. He's also got 6 teats on his udder, 1 pair too many, but I'm more concerned with the fact that he has a distended udder at all, as this trait is pretty exclusive to female cows who have recently calved. Hang on, a demon god with the horned head of a male bovid on a humanoid torso with swollen female mammary glands and cloven hooves? Baphomet, is that you? I kid, and both Arachnotar and Bucentaurs have been mentioned before on this series, but it felt wrong not to discuss them again here. Also, if we want to get super nitpicky, cows don't have upper incisors or round pupils, and those eyes are too forward-facing. But, as we've previously established, Minotaurs have a more carnivorous diet than mundane cattle, so their facial morphology can be expected to reflect that. We also shouldn't get too worked up over a silly cartoon fantasy animal. It's not like this taurine arachnid hybrid was ever something meant to be taken seriously, right? The Ushi-Oni of Japanese folklore is a yokai with the head of a bull or ox on the body of a spider, which, just like Arachnotar, has only 6 legs. They also have very un-cow-like fangs and eat humans, just like the original Minotaur of Greek mythology. I'd say they're just missing the humanoid torso, but this spider cow isn't the only common depiction. Sometimes they are described as having the head of an ox on the body of a much more humanoid Oni, or vice versa. No matter what though, they have to be part ox, because that's literally what their name means, ox demon. It's not just Bucentaurs and spider minotaurs with a surplus of limbs, either. I've also seen the occasional winged minotaur and four-armed minotaurs here and there, such as Megami Tensei's aforementioned Moloch, but they don't seem common enough to have an agreed-upon name. Yet. Another taurine creature from my youth is Ludo of Jim Henson's Labyrinth. Anyone who's seen the film knows that Ludo friend, but long have I wondered, is Ludo Minotaur? There's no denying that he's a taurine-horned humanoid who dwells in a labyrinth, and when we first meet him, he's not a hazard of said location, he's a victim of it, just like Asterion, the OG Minotaur of Greek mythology. In pursuit of an answer, I've watched the making-of documentary Inside the Labyrinth, but nowhere in it does anyone refer to Ludo as a Minotaur. In the fanfic, Return to the Labyrinth, not to be confused with the manga Return to Labyrinth, Sarah encounters an unambiguous Minotaur and remarks that it wouldn't be a proper labyrinth without one. Let me know if you think Ludo counts as a Muppetized Minotaur in the comments. A much less well-known 80s film is Arena, which is a sort of cross between Rocky and Star Wars. Although its principal antagonists are played by Star Trek alumni Mark Alimo and Armin Shimmerman, for any DS9 fans out there, the hero's rival in the ring is the aptly named Horn, a cyborg Minotaur alien thing. In concept, he reminds me of the cyber demons from Doom, but given that Arena predates the video game by nearly 5 years, it might be more correct to say the cyber demons resemble Horn. If I had to give these creatures a categorical name, I'd go with Mechataurs, since Mechanical Bull is already taken. Plus, Minotaur means Bull of Minos, but Minos is nowhere in sight. These are bulls of mechanics. Additionally, the label Mechataur is also given to a cyborg Minotaur in my current urban fantasy whip, which blends elements of classical mythology, cyberpunk, and hard-boiled detective fiction. Conceptually, a Mechataur combines the Minotaur with another taurine monster of Greek mythology, the Kolkatoroi, or Colchis bulls. Their name literally means bronze bulls, owing to their metal hooves and mouths, but some more recent depictions show them as partially mechanical or pure automata. Overall, Mechataurs are actually a more common Minotaur variant than you might first think. One even appears in Phineas and Ferb. Norm the Minotaur, temporarily, has the head of Babe the Blue Ox on the body of Norm, Doofenshmirtz's giant robot assistant. There's also the Minotaur of Halle de la Machine in Toulouse, France, a colossal kinetic sculpture of a bull-headed Bucentaur with a kind of howdah on its back. Another Mechataur is Ray Harryhausen's Minotaur from Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. That is an entire film made of missed potential, from the beautiful location shots of Petra spoiled by subpar green screen work to the emotional premise of a man being slowly stripped of his humanity being undercut by clunky expositional dialogue delivered with either no emotion or Zenobia's hammy histrionics, but nowhere is its wasted potential better embodied, literally, than in the Minotaur. This is another one of Ray Harryhausen's fantastic stop-motion animated figures, and the animation is superb as always, but it didn't need to be. In physical design, it is just a humanoid body with the head of a bull. It could have easily been portrayed by a large actor in a cow hat, as indeed it was. All of its close-up shots used a stop-motion figure, but in the long shots of it on the boat, it was actually played by a costumed Peter Mayhew, who also played Chewbacca in A New Hope that same year. Even looking past its lackluster design, the Minotaur also doesn't do much throughout the film. Spoilers ahead. Early in the film, the Minotaur kills Balsora and his men, but from a plot standpoint, there's no reason their deaths couldn't have been the work of one of Zenobia's spells, which could have been accomplished with a much cheaper effect. Still, this does show off just how physically powerful the Minotaur is, foreshadowing an epic battle with our heroes at the climax of the film, right? Wrong. The Minotaur is destroyed before ever encountering the heroes, when a huge block of stone falls down and crushes it. An equally ignominious end befalls a bronzed Minotaur in Dragon Strike, and if you understand that obscure reference, you're my kind of nerd. The Minotaur's death occurs because he was making a hole in the side of a temple to grant Zenobia entry, but again, there's no reason this outcome couldn't be achieved with Zenobia's magic instead. She even throws a potion on the wall to weaken it for the Minotaur first. In truth, for most of the movie, the Minotaur is just an overly elaborate engine for Zenobia's ship, and if she can use her magic to animate a Minotaurine automaton to row her boat, why can't she just, animate the boat? If robotic Minotaurs aren't to your liking, however, another variation is less inorganic, but no more alive. I refer to undead Minotaurs, starting with Minotaur skeletons. After all, why not? Minotaurs are vertebrates, they've got skeletons, so is an animate Minotaur skeleton any less believable than a regular humanoid one? If you answered yes, take it up with Wizards of the Coast, because a reanimated Minotaur skeleton is a canon CR2 enemy in Dungeons & Dragons. In addition to skeletal Minotaurs, we also have mummified Minotaurs. A man-made Minotaur of sorts is alluded to in Under the Pyramids, also known as Imprisoned with the Pharaohs, attributed to Harry Houdini as its first-person POV narrator, but ghostwritten by H.P. Lovecraft, of all people. In his own words, I saw phantom processions of priests with the heads of bulls, falcons, cats, and ibises. The story features chimeral mummies made from bits of humans and various Egyptian animals Frankensteined together, then raised to a state of undeath, lacking a soul, or Ka. A Minotaur also appears in the Mummy franchise film Scorpion King 2, Rise of a sequel to a spin-off of a sequel to a reboot, but it isn't a mummy itself. For further discussion of mummies, check out this month's previous video about Bram Stoker's The Jewel of Seven Stars, but I digress. The Lovecraftian Minotaur variant also has shades of creation or flesh golem to it, making it related to Minotaur golems. Yes, they're a thing too. The Minigons of Neverwinter Nights and the Brass Golems of Dungeons & Dragons, originating in Dragon Magazine, issue 209, are both Minotaur-shaped golems forged from wizard steel and brass, respectively. In Baldur's Gate, the latter were disappointingly redesigned into something more normal, and I do wonder if they were inspired by the Minotaur. I actually had more to say on him and the work of Ray Harryhausen in general, so much in fact that it threatened to take over this video. That's why I decided to make it its own separate episode, so keep an eye out for that sometime next month. For now though, I've covered pretty much all of the Minotaur variations I can think of. Undead, robots, aliens, and chimeras which are neither fish nor fowl or sometimes both. If you know of any others, please share them in the comments. I look forward to reading them. As always, thanks for watching and have a happy Halloween. Given that M. horridus is this spiky little reptile and T. horridus is this big spiky reptile, I'm dying to see Horridus's intermediate Pokemon evolution. Perhaps it's the timber rattler Crotalus horridus. It's a mid-sized reptile, although one notably lacking in spikes and legs. Side note, I have a fantasy character design, a D&D character to be specific, which is a Triceratops-inspired Retiarius gladiator. With its characteristic frill, the skull of a small ceratopsian could be repurposed as a Galeris, and the 3 points of the trident mirror the eponymous horns of Triceratops. I'd also give him a shoulder-mounted pneumatic net cannon, but that's admittedly more sci-fi than fantasy. In Deep Space Nine, Mark Alaimo and Armin Shimmerman played the franchise's most famous Cardassian and Ferengi, respectively, but on TNG, they each played one of the first members of their respective species.